Joining us with a closer look on what's playing itself out on that market scene at middays, Wessel Joubert from Oyster Catcher Investments. Wessel, a pleasure. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today, Wessel.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, let's get right into it. It's a bit of a weird day on the JSE. It's relatively flat. European markets also strange. Maybe the only thing that stands out for me is this kind of strength the rand is enjoying right now. But all in all, not sure what to make of it.
Yeah, no, it's a bit of a weird day. We've come kind of to the end of US earnings season, so there's a bit of economic data coming out that everybody's kind of waiting for. China's currently got their 2 sessions underway, so everybody kind of reading that, waiting for any indications that China might do big bazooka stimulus, which I don't think we're going to get, but I think the world remains hopeful. And then on the JSE, slightly slower day in terms of earnings, only I think 2 or 3 earnings coming out. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a wait and see day. And then what we've seen on the currency side is actually the currency pricing in very little risk going into elections. I mean, the strength that you've seen recently is kind of contrary to what I think the market would have expected in a volatile year or volatile period like this.
I'm actually going to get your thoughts there. Does that tell us that things could change with more information? Could the currency risk be increased slightly?
So currently the currency prices in very little risk in terms of volatility going into the elections. Usually going into an election, a couple of weeks prior to the election, you actually see the risk peaking, at least that peaking showing up in either fixed income or currency. Yet we haven't seen the rand move. Now, we do know that there is some new data coming out, or more current data on what the election outcomes are expected to be. Prior data points haven't really included the MK party. Yet everybody expected the ANC to be close to the between, let's call it 50 and 45% level. Now, it's going to depend on what the MK party outlook will be, but that will most likely further reduce the support that the ANC gets, at least on paper, which might increase the risk a little bit for the market and for investors, because we know if the ANC, or any indication that the ANC might get below 45%, means that the coalitions are going to have to happen with some of the bigger parties, i.e. DA or EFF, yet we don't know which one yet. So we think the market's going to get, or foreign investors particularly, will get very concerned if it's an EFF coalition, a little bit less so when it's a DA coalition. But yes, that will increase the risk, and we do think you might see a little bit of downside from here on the currency.
Sure. Does sound like a lot of uncertainty that's hanging over our heads at this point, Wessel. Let's also touch on US jobs data. We are expecting that to come out later. Are markets anticipating this? I mean, Jerome Powell has testified this week. He said what he said. And I'm wondering, if the data points might weigh a little bit more than that addressed by him.
Yeah, I do think the market is keeping a close eye on all the data points coming out. There are also, I think, a little bit more weighted towards what the Fed officials are coming out and saying. And we've seen a couple of those Fed officials coming out this week, indicating that the cuts might be less this year than what was previously expected. Now, I think heading into the year, the market expected 6 to 7 cuts, if I remember correctly. Currently, we're sitting at about 2 cuts for the year. So it has come down quite significantly. A portion of it is because of the strength in the US, which you can see in the jobs numbers. But unfortunately, I don't think South Africa gets interest rate cuts until the US starts cutting. So for us, it's a bit of I think we would want the numbers to be a little bit weaker so that we can get those cuts sooner and a little bit more aggressively. But yeah, I think the market's going to wait and see on that one as well.
With that said, keen to get your thoughts on gold. We've seen gold really shooting the lights out, near those record highs again. What do we make of this environment? Is this telling us that, market participants are slightly more jittery than what we anticipated and are looking for safe haven assets?
Yeah. So heading into this year, we know the risks are a lot higher. You've got global elections, I think, at kind of record numbers on a single year. And a lot of those elections are very high profile elections. the US election, we had Taiwan, our own election coming up as well. From a risk perspective, if you have to protect your portfolio, you buy a little bit of gold. Now, there are unexplained increases in purchasing that we have seen as well, and there's a couple of reasons that we can find for it. Some of it being guys arguing that with the big rally in Bitcoin, gold is a similar kind of asset in terms of protection for portfolios. So it might be that you find a lot of guys who can't actually hold Bitcoin buy gold as a protection asset. You have seen a lot of central banks increasing their holdings in gold as well, away from the dollar with all the political risk. And then you've seen the big one in there as well. I think you've seen China being the biggest leader in that space, diversifying their country holdings away from the dollar. But you've also seen with the market turmoil in countries like Russia and so on, they had a lot of their dollar assets frozen when going into the war. You can't really freeze gold as an asset. You'll still be able to trade if you as a country hold that. So a lot of the purchases of gold probably likely ending up in Russia as well.
And Wessel, before we move on to your stock pick, keen to get your thoughts maybe on some of the company news out today. Impact out, it looks like they've got a reasonable performance. Mondi speaking about an acquisition. This is all as a very similar sector. I'm keen just to get your thoughts on the dynamics at play here.
Yeah, so I mean, on the impact results, actually quite a very, very strong set of results considering the environment that you are playing in. They do have a couple of self-help stories in there, and they're executing on a couple of internal things quite well. One of the things being the plastic, what do you call bins and pallets expansion that they're doing there, or upgrade at the mill, their Bombela corrugated plant that they've been upgrading. So a couple of things internally that the management team seems to be executing on very, very well in a very, very tough space. You can imagine in a country like SA, where you do have the pressure that we are seeing, you're not really getting the volumes through the corrugated business. And we have seen their volumes are under pressure. That's been, I think it's down close to 11%, yet you still had the revenue growth there, and then that filtering through to profit growth, which means they're keeping costs under wraps, which is a very, very positive thing, I think, in this environment. There is also a little bit of the, I want to say, the corporate aspect there, where Caxton also released today. Caxton owns a third of Impact, a little bit more than a third of Impact. Their results, similar businesses, not exactly the same, but they do overlap in certain areas, and you can see they face a little bit more pressure, revenue slightly down, earnings slightly down. So yeah, a little bit less of self-help, I think, internally, and we'll have to wait and see who wins. Does Impact buy Caxton, or does Caxton eventually do something with the Impact stake?
Very interesting times ahead indeed, Wessel. I'm keen to get your stock pick, but first I'd like us to reflect on counters that have found favor with your industry peers.
The stock pick for today is Bidvest. I think during difficult and uncertain times like this, what you want is to bet on a management team that has very clear focus on their strategy, able to manage their costs, and keeps executing. This is a group that 6 or 7 years ago said they wanted to have an international business, and they started it from scratch. Now it's about 30% of, it's about 22% of group operating earnings, and it's a formidable business with #1 positions in some of these markets, in Singapore and in Ireland as well. So they've executed incredibly well. And when you look at the core business in SA, despite the lack of GDP growth, they've been able to eke out higher margins, generate cash, and grow earnings, despite all the difficulties there are in their core industries. So I think this is one of those ones that you buy and lock up for the long term.
My pick today is going to be Nedbank. I think they produced a solid set of results. I think it was Tuesday this week. I think there's a bit of a fear that with declining rates, the top lines of the banks might, or potentially declining rates anyway, the top line of the banks might suffer a little bit. But I think there's going to be a big offset from the kind of impairments or credit losses coming through. You saw it in the Nedbank results that the credit losses came down. So I think the banks will benefit from an improving consumer sort of strain, I suppose, from the high interest rates as interest rates go lower. And then obviously two other things on Nedbank is that they've got kind of a new CEO coming in who might kind of refresh the strategy and kind of perhaps change the trajectory. And also it's cheap. It's looking attractive from a valuation point of view relative to the other guys. So I think Nedbank is a good place to be for now.
So my stock pick for today is Super Microcomputer. So it's a bit of an unknown stock, but it is really doing quite well. Year to date, the share price is up by 300%. And basically what their company does is that they provide service for AI companies and AI technology. And as we can see, looking at the NASDAQ and the Magnificent Seven, AI is something that is seemingly here to stay. And we see that Super Microcomputer is going to be entering, the S&P 500 in March, I think 18th of March. So now actually Knockout will pull out of that. So it is quite a nice business to look at, as for people that are focusing on AI, such as your Nvidias, Cadences, etc. I think Super Microcomputer is where it all starts.
All right, Wessel, keen to get your thoughts on some of those counters. We've got Bidvest, Nedbank, as well as Super Microcomputer.
Yeah. So, I mean, we recently had results from Bidvest, which were actually much stronger than you would have expected for a company so exposed to the South African environment, which just points to the diversification of the business and the strong management team. So we do like Bidvest a lot. Valuation is high, but it seems like these quality companies, you never get at the right price or a cheap price. They always seem to over-deliver relative to expectations, and the share price is always strong. So really like that. We also do like Nedbank. It is one of the cheaper banks. It has lagged a little bit some of the other banks in the recent times, and as mentioned, there are some management changes there. So we'll have to wait and see what the new management team or new CEO is going to do. But they have had a very older, if I can call it that, strategy prior. So any new blood might put a little bit of fire under the share price. And it is cheap. It does generate good cash, good dividend yield. So we do like both of them.
And which counter are you loving this afternoon?
Ooh, if you had to ask me about those three, I'd probably go with a safe bet and pick Bidvest. But maybe a Caxton. Caxton, I think at this stage, you're sitting with 3.7 billion rand company, 1.3 billion rand holding an impact, 1.8 billion rand in cash, which means for the core of the business, you are paying roughly a 1x earnings multiple. So even if the business is under a bit of strain, it is very, very cheap.
Fantastic, Wessel. An absolute pleasure having you this afternoon. Thank you so much for speaking to us. That was your midday market update with Wessel Joubert from Oyster Catcher Investments.